American Swahili News and Swahiliville Online TV. Today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are joining with the Senior Associate for the National Democratic Institute of International Affairs, Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh. Dr. Fomunyoh, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be on your show, and I commend your efforts to broadcast in Swahili so that the populations on the continent as well as globally can participate in our conversations about democracy and what that means for the African continent.
Dr. Fomunyoh, maybe a lot of East Africans, particularly people in Tanzania and Zanzibar, probably they never heard about you in our channel. And today's the first time. We're very honored to bringing you live in our channel. And let me thank you first for taking your time. I know you have a very busy schedule. Let me take you back. Can you share just a little bit about yourself, because you have a very long educational background with the respect also with the work in democracy in the continent of Africa. Walk us through just a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I am from Cameroun on the African continent. So I'm African, an African brother. And interestingly for me, whenever I go to the continent, it doesn't matter which country I'm in, people find something in me that identifies with the country. They see me, I'm tall, and they say, oh, you could be Kenyan. Or I'm dark skinned, they say, you could be from Tanzania. I speak French, and you could be from any one of the Francophone countries. So I'm from Cameroon, from the northwestern part of Cameroon. Came to the United States a couple of decades ago, for graduate studies. Having studied in Cameroon as a graduate of the University of Yaoundé, where I studied law and economics, graduated with a degree in law, came over to Harvard Law School, did an LLM in international law at Harvard, and then did a PhD in political science, comparative politics at Boston University. And NDI asked me to come help them set up their Africa portfolio. And I've been with NDI since then. It's been well over 25 years. I'm still with the organization because of the challenges that democratization continues to face. And I feel very fortunate having to help NDI run its Africa programs because that's home, and it gives me an opportunity to give something back to the continent.
Dr. Christopher, you're carrying a huge, I can say, work, especially when we talk about democracy in Africa. Today, in the 21st century, according to your vision and objective of your organizations, is to make sure that democracy brings freedom, prevail with the dignity for all in the continent of Africa. Walk us through about the East Africa now, because we have heard a lot of undemocratic activities or issues that has been happening, particularly in Tanzania and Zanzibar. Walk us through what is your opinion with respect to that?
Well, I think that most of the continent is grappling or struggling with the inheritance that we had. That if you looked at Africa, say, for example, in 1990, many of the countries across the continent, in fact, all of the countries except 4, were either one-party states or under military regimes. And the only 4 countries that were considered pluralistic or democratic were Mauritius, which is in the Indian Ocean, Botswana, Senegal, and the Gambia. And so the rest of East Africa was one-party states. And so transforming those countries from one-party regimes or regimes in which liberation movements had come into power into functioning democracies has been quite a challenge. Some countries have gone faster than others. Others are still struggling with those transitions, but that all confirms the fact that democracy is a never-ending endeavor. When we look at the Southern and East Africa region at this point, you want to look at some of the progress that has happened in a country like Malawi, for example, where the judiciary has been asserting its independence. And we know that at one point, the Supreme Court even had to nullify presidential elections, call for new elections. Civil society was very instrumental in that process. All the Malawians accepted the outcome, and the country is making strides to consolidate its democratic gains. Today in Malawi, for example, 41% of the cabinet ministers are women. 45% of the diplomatic corps of Malawi is made up of women, and 50% of the appointments in the judiciary are actually held by women. So the country is, as it makes progress and makes strides, it's also being more inclusive in terms of providing opportunities for women and youth. We look at a country like Zambia, that is also on the right path. That is, in fact, in the last iteration, had a peaceful alternance or alteration of political power through the ballot process. And this is about the fourth time that Zambia is going through this. And we look back at the fact that Zambia, in fact, in the early 90s, was one of the countries to open up and to go through meaningful elections. And those elections showed that even a founding father, as President Kenneth Kaunda, who was all revered, could lose an election through the ballot process, accept the outcome, and allow for the country to move forward. And today, Zambia is in about its fourth alternation of power through the ballot process, which means that democracy is already taking root. Then we have, of course, that's one end of the spectrum. But then on the other end, you have countries like Zimbabwe that are still struggling with issues of rights for citizens, inclusiveness, nonviolence in its politics. You have countries such as South Africa that had a good transition, and where the smaller parties are still inching their way into governance processes, winning in some of the local elections and having a foothold in some of the cities and being able to run municipalities. You have countries such as Mozambique that are still struggling with issues of insecurity now in the north. When we thought that the armed conflict of the 90s was behind us, here comes insecurity in the northern provinces of Mozambique. And then you have lovely Tanzania that's somewhere in the middle, grappling with some real opportunities and wanting to make change, but with people still hoping that the promises can actually be concretized so that people can see meaningful change and avenues for genuine citizen participation. So that's painting everything in a broad stroke, but I hope that we can go into some of the details through our conversation.
You have alluded a significant, meaningful explanations as you have described about the situation in Malawi and Zambia and Zimbabwe. And in the end, you have touched about the Tanzania is still in the middle. Last week, you had an opportunity to meet with the Tanzanian president and the foreign minister, Mama Mulamula. Walk us through during that discussion. Where do you see Tanzania now? Because for the past 6 years, they have been struggling in Zanzibar and Maryland when it comes to the election at the ballot poll. Walk us through that discussion.
In fact, we had the privilege of being received by Her Excellency, President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who, as we speak, is the only serving president on the African continent who is female. She's the only woman president on the continent. And it was the president of NDI. Our delegation was led by the president of NDI, Ambassador Derek Mitchell himself. And then we had our senior director for gender, women, and democracy, Sandra Pepera, and myself, as senior associate for Africa, meeting received by the president and her delegation, on which there was the foreign minister, Minister Mula. There was also the ambassador, the Tanzanian ambassador to Washington, the director of the Americas and Europe within the foreign ministry of Tanzania. So it was a very high power delegation on their side as well, led by the president herself. We had very meaningful discussions about the issues that the country faces, but we started off by hearing or listening to the president explain to us her vision for Tanzania, her vision for change, and her commitment to bring meaningful change to Tanzania. And it was heartwarming to see that her heart is really into changing the way that Tanzania has operated and the way that it's been viewed by the rest of the world. We got the sense that she's very committed to making change happen. She's very committed to bringing the opposition parties into the fold so they too can participate in the meaningful multi-party dialogue that has been instituted in the country, and that she would rather have Tanzanians enjoy their rights and liberties and contribute to the development of the country. In the same conversation, we also realized that there are challenges that come with the process. And it was comforting to know that she herself is aware of those challenges and that she intends to take on those challenges and make sure that she can help the country, really, in this 21st century, dismantle some of the practices of the one-party state that made political participation extremely difficult in Tanzania.
It's well known that for the past 6 years, the democracy in Tanzania has significantly declined. And here, Mama Samia met with your highly officials from the NDI. Tell us just a little bit, what are those challenges that was discussed during the meeting? And then I know some of them, they were private, but walk us through some of those challenges that was mentioned by Mama Samia in her delegation.
Well, I would say that kind of without going into all the specifics, as you can imagine, the president is, let me put it this way. As you talk through the 6 years
yes,
of what has transpired in Tanzania, there are two things that come to mind. One is that the backsliding, the democratic decline that you reference is something that our organization has seen and has been dealing with globally. Around the world, we have seen this re-emergence of authoritarian tendencies, where authoritarian regimes have tried to take advantage of whether it's the pandemic or even the context before the pandemic to shrink political space. And that is manifested itself even in this hemisphere. It's manifested itself in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, even with established democracies, and it has manifested itself on the African continent as well. Now, within the context of Tanzania, we also have to be mindful that the president has emerged as a president in the last year or so, year and a half. And so she is now at the helm of the state in a different capacity from the capacity in which she found herself during the previous 5 years or so. And so it's incumbent upon her now as the head of state, as the president of the country, to steer the state of state in a way that captures her vision for the country and acknowledging that she is at the helm and will be held responsible for decisions that she makes, or has the responsibility now more than ever before when she was in a different capacity in the previous years that you alluded to. I mean, some of the challenges that even she acknowledged has to do with creating an inclusive environment where opposition parties can also have their voices heard and where everyone can participate in and contribute to the development of the country without the polarization that we have seen that in the worst case, in its worst manifestation, had leaders of opposition parties being jailed for over 8 months or so. We were delighted to hear that and to know that those leaders have now been freed. And in fact, the president shared with us that she's had meetings with them, and on her return from the United States, plans further meetings with them by the end of this month to find ways to listen to them and find ways in which they too can have a seat at the table in terms of contributing to develop a healthy and inclusive political environment for the country as a whole.
Political diversities and inclusion is one of the problems that the Tanzanian government and the ruling party have seen to pretty much decrease the space that the involvement of the opposition's party, particularly the Chadema. You have alluded a few minutes ago that the leader of the Chadema was in jail for 8 months and now has been released. But the presidential candidate, Tundu Lissu, who ran for the presidential seat 2020, he's still in exile. Walk us through, did you guys had an opportunity to discuss about Tundu Lissu, or what is your opinion with respect to Lissu to be in exile in Belgium? And here, President Samia Suluhu is in Washington, D.C., and 2 days ago, he was in the White House. Walk us through about that.
Yes, indeed. It's extremely unfortunate that in the 21st century, when people aspire to political office, including the office of the president, whose mission is really to serve all of the people of the country, it would be most unfortunate that when people compete for that office, their lives are threatened or they're even shot at and have to end up in exile. And I believe that it's contradictory to talk about democracy when elections are not properly conducted and when candidates for elections then find that their lives are threatened or have to end up in exile. The process of opening up the political arena, the process of being inclusive and making room for other political parties to form and for civil society to be able to advocate for issues that are of importance to citizens, of citizens to even be able to monitor their own elections and report on them. Those are pillars of democratic governance, which I hope the new government and the president are committed to. And I know, having listened to the president, that if her commitment is real, then she is going to have to deliver on the promise of creating a more inclusive environment. My hope is that when she meets again with the leaders of the Chadema party by the end of this month, that together they will be able to find common ground in terms of addressing the grievances of the past, including the very challenging environment in which the 2020 elections were conducted, and also agree on the kinds of reforms that will need to be put in place to make sure that the next elections, when they come up in 2025, are more peaceful, more meaningful, more inclusive, and less violent, so that every Tanzanian can feel proud of the progress that would have been made under her role as president of the country.
Democracy allows nations to settle for their internal differences peaceful through election, open debate, and also accountable government and rule of laws. These are the words that you will find in your website that has been depicted or explained very well. Do you think right now, specifically, not only in the continent of Africa, but in Tanzania, these are the key components that Tanzanian president promises?
I can only base this on what the president herself said. That she's very committed to making sure that Tanzania moves steadily on the trajectory of democratic governance. She talked about some of the changes that she has already implemented under her tenure in terms of making sure that political prisoners were released and that even the charges, you may remember, there were very heavy charges of terrorism pending against the opposition leader, that those charges were dropped. And so you take those commitments and you also say, Your Excellency, We're delighted that you're making these commitments, and organizations such as NDI and other civil society organizations working with our Tanzanian partner organizations would like to be engaged in accompanying the people of Tanzania, but also keeping an eye to make sure that these challenges or these promises are actually respected and fully implemented. That is the role that nonprofit organizations can play. That's the role that Tanzanian civil society should take on to make sure that the commitments that are made by its elected officials and its leaders are actually implemented and fully respected.
Helping nature the seeds of democracy is one of your goals or one of your tasks that you have been done across the world, particularly in the continent of Africa. Do you think NDI is ready to do that?
Oh, NDI is ready. We have had the opportunity to work with civil society organizations in Kenya. In Tanzania, we have had the opportunities to convene platforms that allow for different voices to be heard. And I think that's the beauty of organizations such as NDI, that we don't come into a country with a preconceived notion of what must be implemented by the specific country. We come with the expertise that we have from working on these issues around the globe, including on the continent of Africa. We come with best practices that have worked for other countries, with lessons that we've learned through those experiences, and we put them on the table in a non-partisan fashion, hoping that the civic actors, the political actors of those countries can then go through the menu, adapt what they can, and help use those tools or those ideas to strengthen their own democratic processes. We all know that democracy is a work in progress, that each country has got its specificity, and that needs to be taken into consideration. But we also acknowledge that democracy has got some universal values, universal principles that should apply everywhere in the world. For example, the ability of citizens to express their views freely without fear of harm to their persons, without fear of destruction of their property, the ability for citizens to compete for public office and to govern should they be elected by their fellow citizens, and the ability of institutions such as parliaments and political parties to play a constructive role in exercising checks and balances, so that even those that receive a mandate from the citizen can implement that mandate, knowing that they will be held accountable at the end of the day for their performance in office. So those are the kinds of ways in which NDI and other organizations that work in this arena can engage the people of Tanzania, both on the mainland as well as in Zanzibar, something that we've been doing for a couple of years now, and hopefully will continue to do in partnership with Tanzanians across the board.
To work democracy and to make democracy work, those are the words that you'll find within your website. Walk us through now with respect to the opposition party, particularly Chadema, who now they have refused to join the task force that has been created by the President Samia Suluhu Hassan. What is your advice with respect to those words, to work democracy and to make democracy work?
In fact, you've just paraphrased the words of our chairman, Madeleine Albright, and as you can imagine, we are still grieving with her loss, which is a tremendous loss for our organization and for the United States, where she served as the first woman Secretary of State, but also for the world, because she's being mourned by Democrats across the globe. And she used to say very strongly and very firmly that democracy must deliver, that citizens must see an improvement in their well-being when they make the transition from autocratic rule to democratic rule or to democracy. And we always keep that in mind as one of our mantras, to make sure that citizens can see a difference. Because if a country is still functioning the same way that when it calls itself a democracy as it did decades ago, when it was a one-party state, there's something wrong with that picture. We recognize that when a party such as the main opposition party, Chadema, has gone through some rough spots and has been the victim of some injustices in the past, it takes a while for those wounds to heal. And you have to engage them first, to listen to them, have a sense of their grievances, try to walk, at least mentally, the path that they have walked through, and then share with them advice on how other political parties have dealt with those kinds of challenges. And so it may take a time for them to heal, but I'm gratified that President Samia Hassan is opening herself up to engage with them, to listen to them, and as she shared with us, to work with them to find common ground on how they can put in place processes that would allow each Tanzanian to contribute to the development of the country, irrespective of their political inclination and their political leaning. So when that kind of initiative is coming from within and the parties buy into it, it becomes extremely easy for an organization like NDI to then provide all the parties with ideas on how they can strengthen those internal processes so that by the time they get to the next election, Chadema is not going to be looking over its shoulders because the security services are making it extremely difficult for them to participate in the political process. What we have done with some of the other African countries, and that has worked extremely well, is we've helped parties think through their electoral laws. How can you make sure that the electoral framework is open for all parties, whether they're ruling parties or in opposition? How can you make sure that the election commission conducts itself in a neutral way that gives equal opportunities to all political parties? How can you come up with a political party charter that defines the rules, but also the responsibilities of all political parties, whether they're ruling parties or opposition parties, so that no one feels cheated? Because the beauty of democracy is that a party can be in opposition today and in government tomorrow. And a party can be in government today and in opposition tomorrow. And that's a message that all political leaders need to internalize so that as they deal with each other, they recognize that they could be in each other's shoe or position in the next year or in the next electoral iteration. And I think that those are some of the ideas that we could share with Chadema, we could share with the ruling party, we could share with the ruling class, both on the mainland and on the island. And we could help the parties in the island, for example, where they're experimenting with the government of national unity, because the island has been so polarized, consolidate that process and work together to put in place processes that can strengthen democratic participation and the peaceful contribution of citizens in the political and economic development of their communities and of the country as a whole.
Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh, if I pronounce your last name very well.
Fine.
What is your last what is your last word now with respect to 2025 election in Tanzania? Are you pessimistic or you optimistic with respect to the peaceful, free and fair election in Tanzania, based upon an outcome of the meeting that you had in Washington, D.C. with President Samia and her delegation?
In fact, if you asked me this question 2 years ago, given the political developments in Tanzania at the time, I would have told you that I was rather pessimistic. And 2020 turned out to be a very difficult period for the country. Asking me this question now, my response to you would be that I'm cautiously optimistic because President Samia Hassan is in a different place from her predecessor. She seems committed to doing the right thing. She was very articulate in laying out, in sharing with us her vision for the country. She's in the right frame of reference. I see even in the way in which she has constituted her cabinet, the inclusiveness on gender. The foreign minister is a woman. The speaker, the new speaker that the country just got, is also female. I see that the president really wants to do the right thing for her fellow citizens and for the country. And by opening up to organizations such as NDI and others to work side by side with the people of Tanzania, with its civil society organizations, its media outlets, the registrar of political parties across the board, that kind of collaboration and cooperation can allow the people of Tanzania to have the best opportunities to consolidate change in the country and to consolidate the country's democratic development. So I am more optimistic going into 2025 than I was coming into 2020. But as we all say in this business, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. We're going to have to test the political will that is showing its head right now and making sure that ultimately it delivers for the well-being of the people of Tanzania as a whole. And you can count NDI as a partner in that relationship.
Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh, before I let you go, we're going to play a video, a clip. It's less than a minute. Then was Tanzania ambassador in Washington, D.C., and now she's a foreign minister. And then in the back of it, I want you to make your comment. Abdul Shatter, play that video.
For women's economic empowerment, do you find that it starts with the political right now as well?
Yeah, let me start by saying, of course, for the women empowerment for our countries, it is a new movement. Mm-hmm. But traditionally, the women were power in the societies because everything depended and revolved around a woman. And statistically, of course, most of our women are rural. They are in the rural sector, they are in the agriculture. So everybody depends on the labor force because the big labor force is women. Mm-hmm. And what we eat, what we use as raw materials, it all revolves around a woman. But now it has taken a different dimension because while women are doing so much in the household level, community level, but they didn't have that power of decision making, mm-hmm. even to decide on what to do with the produce. They produce, but then the man decides where to sell, what to do with the money. Mm-hmm. So this is at our mother's level.
What is your comment with respect to that short video that we just played?
I would say that the situation is evolving positively. On this particular point, Tanzania now has the only female sitting president on the entire African continent of the 54 countries. The cabinet has good representation, starting with the foreign minister. On the legislative branch, the speaker is a woman. And I can see that there is a commitment to create more inclusivity so more women can get into leadership positions. I would also say that during the meeting that we had with President Samia Hassan, she actually said, and you know that we're now dealing with this intergenerational dialogues on gender equality and women's empowerment. In fact, I just returned from Lilongwe in Malawi, where a 3-day conference was being led by former President Joyce Banda, one of the women who's been a president on the continent before. A 3-day conference at which we had former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, former President Catherine Samba Panza of the Central African Republic, these women that have held high office, encouraging women of the younger generation to step forward and stand on their shoulders to aspire to political leadership on the continent. And to hear the foreign minister, now the foreign minister of Tanzania, also talk about women's empowerment and the need to bring women to the forefront, including women in rural areas who carry the burden of development of our families and communities and the country at large, is very heartwarming. President Samia Hassan told us during the meeting that she has stepped forward and identified the priority of women's economic empowerment as one of the 7 pillars that has now been identified by the United Nations. She has taken that pillar as one of the pillars in which she will be a champion. So the promise is made, the fruits are looking beautiful, the promise has been made, the flowers are looking beautiful. We now are waiting for the fruits to bear. So hopefully the women of Tanzania can step forward, take on the leadership, including within the political parties, so that the country can continue to forge forward in a very inclusive manner.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh, for joining with American Swahili News and also with American Swahili News and Swahiliville Online TV. Thank you again for taking your time, and you welcome back again. Whenever you have a time, you can join us and keep us updated with respect what's going on, not only in Tanzania, but across the continent of Africa. Thank you, Dr. Christopher.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I wish my Swahili was much better than just saying 2 words, asante sana.
Karibu sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.